I'm Craig Tackerberry, Chief Assistant Director of Public Works for Marin County, and I want to thank you all for being here. And just wanted to open up the meeting tonight. In 2005, Congress picked Marin County and 3 other communities to be part of a pilot looking at non-motorized transportation. We received $25 million at that time, and then about $6.25 a few years later. When we started that project, you still can't, let me tip it up a little bit. When we started that program, we kind of looked at 3 different things. We looked at projects, and we did education outreach efforts, and also some planning for the future. This project tonight falls into that kind of category, looking at planning for the future. This is actually the last project from the non-motorized program. After this is over, that'll be the end of that program. This study was done in conjunction with the county and the town of Corte Madera and the city of Mill Valley staff, and I want to recognize Council Member Diane First here. Thanks for being here. Any other council members here tonight from Mill Valley or Corte Madera? Jim Andrews and Bob Ravazio. Thanks for being here. Appreciate it. So at this point, no decisions have been made about this project. We want to make sure everybody understands that, and we don't plan on making any decisions tonight. Tonight's really to tell you about the study and have you ask questions about it and understand the study and help us get the study correct. Is there any factual inaccuracies? Somebody's going to make a decision at some point in the future, and we want them to make it on the best facts available. So we want your kind of input on that. There'll be a chance to provide comments in writing. If you have to leave early, you could grab a yellow card. You could send them by email after the meeting or verbally tonight. We'll have a lot of options. So the agenda, we're going to have a presentation that'll discuss the meeting purpose, kind of give a little history of the bike and ped studies that have been done through this corridor. Then we'll have a detailed presentation about the tunnel investigation, looking at the drilling and scanning process that took place, the results of the investigation, the updated cost estimates, and then next steps. And then we want to hear from you. We'll have we have an hour for questions and answers. We have a panel of people here that have some answers, and so we'll try to answer the questions we can, and the ones we can't, we'll get back to you on. So with that, I will introduce Carrie Lando. She's been the project manager for the county for this study, which the original one started about 2008, maybe. She's been at this for 9 years. So I'm glad that she stuck with it. So I'm going to turn it over to Carrie. Please join me in thanking her for all the work she's done for 8 years.
Thanks, Craig. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm glad to see a full house tonight. Can I ask a question? How many of you were here for the meeting that we had on the original Mill Valley to Corte Madera corridor study? Can you show of hands? So quite a few here. We have some long history here, folks. And then we also had a meeting in November 2015 on the right-of-way results. How many of you were attending that meeting? Great. So quite a few of you also. So I just want to quickly go over what the previous direction was to study. We wanted to, after the Mill Valley to Corte Madera study, we had some questions that came out of that about the Alto tunnel corridor. And we wanted to further evaluate the property and rights-of-way issues. We weren't quite certain about what those were, so we wanted to further study those, and then also to investigate the interior condition of the tunnel, because we hadn't been in there in a long time. And we thought that those 2 things might affect the cost estimates that were identified in the Mill Valley to Corte Madera corridor study. So that purpose that we've done over the last several years was to take a look at those and then revise those cost estimates. So that's what the purpose of tonight is, to review those final cost estimate updates based on that new information that we've just learned over the last several years, and make sure that we got it right. So I want to introduce Victoria Eisen. She's going to come up and do a brief talk about what tonight's meeting is really about and what our question and answer session is going to be like.
Okay, so one more historic question. How many of you were at the meeting that we had in January that kicked off this whole study? Okay, so a lot of you know how we did it last time. It seemed to work really well, so we're going to do it again. But first, I just want to clarify, like we did last time, that the Alto tunnel study is an investigation of the inside of the tunnel, like Carrie said, and its physical condition. It's not a pathway feasibility study. And so therefore, tonight, we're going to report on what we found inside the tunnel and how it affects the cost estimates for doing various things with the tunnel, but we're not discussing the pathway and whether or not we're going to do a pathway. That's a decision to be made with the information that came out of this study. So just a few ground rules, typical things. Don't interrupt people. And everyone was really great about that at the last meeting. We have these yellow slips. There's stacks of them in the back, but if you raise your hand when I'm done talking, I'll hand you one or two or three. And if you have a question that occurs to you during the presentation or a comment that you want to make, just write it down on this and we'll collect them. There's a bunch of check boxes so that you can categorize what you have to say, and then we're going to take a few minutes. You can go have some cookies after the presentation, and we're going to group these questions so that we can, in kind of an orderly way, answer them the best we can, and then we have a written record of them so that we can put them all on the website for people who weren't able to make it to tonight's meeting. And then the last piece of business is if you didn't get a chance to sign in at one of the sign-in sheets at the front of the room, I have extra sign-in sheets also, so also raise your hand.
Okay, since you guys are all pretty well educated about what the background is, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. Kind of focus here where we are right now is in 2016 and 17, we investigated the interior condition of the tunnel. This is just a recap, letting you know about, the corridor study took a look at 3 separate corridors between Mill Valley and Corte Madera. The purpose of that corridor study was to evaluate and give information about those 3 corridors, not to compare them with each other. Not to compare them with each other, or not to select a preferred route or course of action, but to provide information on possible improvements along those corridors. That study, along with this one as well, as Craig mentioned earlier, was 100% funded by non-motorized transportation pilot program funds. This just gives you a little bit of facts about the Alto tunnel. It's just over 2,100 feet long, 16 feet wide. The cost estimates in the 2010 study identified for the tunnel segment only 40 to 50 million, and the entire segment, the entire route, about 48 to 60 million for all of the improvements combined. That compares to the Cal Park Tunnel between San Rafael and Larkspur. It's 1,100 feet long. Back in November 2015, we reported out to the community on our research about the right-of-way rights, about whether or not we had the rights to establish a public pathway. And we found that the county holds the center. Union Pacific still holds the outer sides of the tunnel, and then there is one private owner on the southern end. So with that information, we use that to update our cost estimates for right-of-way acquisition. So now we're going to get into the meat and potatoes of tonight's presentation. going on into answering the question about what the structural integrity of the tunnel interior and whether or not it affected the 2010 cost estimates. So we took a look, we wanted to take a look in between the concrete plug on the north end of the tunnel and the pea gravel filled area on the south end of the tunnel, because we haven't been in that section of the tunnel in a really long time. There's other sections of the tunnel that we knew a little bit about, but that center section is the area that we didn't know really anything about. So that's what we really needed to know in order to update those cost estimates for either reconstruction as a pathway or for stabilizing if at some point in the future that was a decision that was necessary for stabilizing that tunnel and closing it. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Sean Sprang. He's from McMillan Jacobs Associates, and he's going to take us through all of the process of drilling and investigating the interior of the tunnel. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm actually going to skip that slide. So this is a plan view, or I'm sorry, a section view through the tunnel and the hillside. Okay, let me raise that up a bit. How about now? How about now? Excellent. This is a section view through the tunnel and the hillside. We've talked about the south end of the tunnel. We had a collapse. This is actually filled in with pea gravel that occurred back in, I believe, 1981. This is the north end of the tunnel. We actually have a section here that's backfilled with a low-strength concrete material, 125 feet long. So it's the interior of this tunnel that is currently inaccessible to manned entry. So the purpose of this study was to investigate the interior of the tunnel. What we did was, from the ground surface, we drilled 5 holes, 5-inch diameter, steel-cased holes from the ground surface to intercept the tunnel. Once those holes were completed, we had a specialty subcontractor come out who performed laser scanning. This was completed with a probe that we lowered down into the tunnel, and it has an articulated head at the end of the probe, and it spins around as it shoots out a laser, and it basically pings back a response for a distance. And it produces essentially a 3-dimensional point cloud that we can then gather the data and produce a 3-dimensional image. Other things to note here in the pink here, this is UPRR property or holdings, and we have UPRR here at the north end as well. This is the Underhill Road site at the south portal. This just shows where our drilling operation was staged. This is a typical drilling operation. Recall this work took place during February, March. It was pretty rainy. We did a really good job of isolating the site and limiting erosion. This is the site when we were completed with drilling. We actually covered each borehole location right here with an access box so we could come in later and do our scanning. This is the Chapman site. The tunnel is shown here in red coming through here. This site is right at the very top of Camino Alto. And we actually took Chapman Lane for about 2 or 3 weeks as we drilled down. We had 3 locations that we drilled from here. This is a typical drilling operation from the Chapman site. And this is when we're completed. We had 3 traffic rated boxes that cover each one of our holes. This is one of the traffic rated boxes. This is what's inside the box, the steel casing and a cover on each casing. Okay, so I'm going to quickly give you guys a overview of what we found first, and then I'll get into the details of what we actually saw in the slides to come. But to summarize, boring B1, we hit collapsed material. Boring B2, we also hit collapsed material. Boring B3, collapsed material. Boring B4 was open. It was not collapsed. Boring B5 was a little bit hard to determine what it was. I'll get to that later, but we found that it was open, not collapsed. So to get into it, this is our first boring that we saw. Actually, after we completed the drilling of each boring, we sent down a GoPro video just so we can get a image of what we had at the inside the tunnel. And when we were drilling, we weren't quite sure what we found. We knew we were in the tunnel. The drilling operation uses air to push cuttings back up. We lost air circulation, meaning we'd hit a void. We definitely hit something different. This is what we found when we lowered the GoPro in. The boring was where it needed to be, but we encountered rubble. For reference, this is 5 inches thick. This hole that you see here, that's actually, we advanced the drilling and the casing as far as we could, and then we actually retracted the casing a little bit to get this video. So that's the 5-inch casing hole that you see right there. It was collapsed rock. We found no void, and so we could not scan at this location. Again, B2, kind of the same deal, although we couldn't advance the casing. So this is the steel casing that you see here. Again, rubble material that we terminated into. Boring B3, again, here's our steel casing. And it's a little bit hard to see, but this is rubble material directly in front of the casing. Again, scanning was not possible in this boring. Finally, B4, where we did encounter some open tunnel. This is a still image from the GoPro video. All we could see here was water droplets, so we knew that there was some water in the floor of the tunnel, and we would have to wait for our scan to actually determine what the tunnel looked like at that location. And the view from boring B5, it was a little bit hard for us to determine just what it looked like, only based on the GoPro video, but we could actually see this is a wooden support. Here's more wood supports here. We weren't quite sure what we had until we lowered the scanning instrument down. So this is the results of the boring B4, the one where we had a good clear image of the interior of the tunnel. This is an actual scan. This is what the interior of the tunnel looks like. It's what we call a 7-piece timber set. It's 1, 2, 3, 4 in the crown, and then 3 more coming down around. But this is actually taken from a slice down the center of the tunnel, so we only see 1/2 of the tunnel. And then for reference, this is not Alto tunnel, but this is a similar train tunnel of a similar vintage with the same kind of wooden supports that we're seeing here in the Alto tunnel. We just added that for reference. So the probe was from the inside of the tunnel is producing a 3-dimensional point cloud. This is a view of the scan looking above the tunnel, looking down. What you see, each of one of these notches is an individual timber set that we see here. So basically, each timber set is producing a shadow. And a shadow is cast. The further out you see, the shadow is kind of casting this diagonal line of the scan. What we see here is a view of, I want to say about 80 feet that we're showing here. We actually could see from this scan approximately 150 feet. 200 is the outer reaches of what we could see. 150 feet, we could actually see sets, and we could determine that the tunnel was in fact open through the scanned area. This is our interpretation of what we were able to measure from the scan, because we're actually, it's kind of georeferenced, and we can actually get dimensions from the scan. And this actually was in line with what we expected. We had some as-built drawings of what the tunnel looked like. So this was in line with what we expected. The surface that we're able to see from the scan here, that's actually the water surface. And then based on the anticipated height here, we were able to to determine that there's about 2 to 3 feet of water at this location in the tunnel. Boring B5, it's really hard to see. Here, we could manipulate it. We could see a slightly better view. What happened here was that the boring terminated so close to the tunnel wall that that rotating head could not articulate and turn around. So we couldn't get that three-dimensional cloud view at boring B5. What we were able to get was 2 individual scan lines. Imagine if the three-dimensional view is a sphere, we could get 2 slices of that sphere. One perpendicular to the probe and one parallel to the probe. And you can just barely make it out here. It was enough for us to establish that this portion of the tunnel was also intact, but it's only about 20 feet or so that we could see. We couldn't see any beyond that. Okay, so I want to get into what this all meant for us and how we interpret this data for our cost estimate and for our design. Recall that this portion here, we know what this is. This was backfilled with pea gravel back in '81. This section here this is cast in place concrete at the north portal. This section here is gunite over either steel sets or timber sets. We did not actually enter this portion of the tunnel because it's sealed up with a steel gate, but we could actually peek in and it looks intact, but we couldn't actually verify. So we're inferring that this is intact. We'd also have 125 feet of concrete plug, we know that, and there may or may not be soil backfill in this area. The remainder of the tunnel is what we're interpreting with our scans. So starting at the south end, we know that the first 3 out of 3 borings encountered collapsed zones. We also know that the south end is also the end that had experienced some collapses in the past. There were reports of minor collapses in this area, another collapse in this area. So it wasn't totally unexpected that we'd find some collapses here. We also had the original construction records from this tunnel, and we know that they installed heavier supports in this area as they were excavating, and that indicates to us that the ground was lower quality there. So past experience, more timber sets in this area, plus the fact that we encountered 3 out of 3 borings that were in a collapsed zone. For the purposes of our investigation, we've assumed that this entire area here is collapsed. These 2 borings here encountered unobstructed views of the tunnel. They were not collapsed. We also have no indication that there were prior collapses in this area. And the construction records show that the support was not quite as heavy in the north half of the tunnel. So we have interpreted this portion of the tunnel to be intact. Well, actually, we've also, based on comments that we've had since we've produced our draft report, we've also looked at a couple ranges too on what would happen if more is collapsed and less is collapsed. Sorry. And we'll get more into that later when we talk about the cost estimates. Okay, so getting into how we use that data, getting into the design, our basis for design for the multi-use pathway is the Cal Park Tunnel. That is shown here. This is actually a view of the multi-use path at Cal Park on opening day, so it's a bit more trafficked than we might usually see. And this is Cal Park. This is the multi-use portion of Cal Park. Recall that Cal Park is actually a much wider tunnel than Alto is, and it's split between rail on one half and pathway on the other half. And that gets to be important for the design that we came up with for Alto. So the pathway only at Alto would be a similar size to what was used at Cal Park. And that's 11-foot 4 inches at least wide, at least about 15 feet high. For Alto, our cost estimate assumed that the entire tunnel from one end to the other, or portal to portal, is upgraded. It's improved with steel sets and shotcrete. Our estimate was for the tunnel work only. It did not include pathway upgrades leading up to the tunnel. The amenities that we assumed for Alto, similar to Cal Park, lighting, radio communication, emergency call stations, ventilation, etc. We've just assumed the same at Alto. Okay. So we've come up with a couple different support schemes for Alto, depending on whether or not we're in the concrete plug section, open tunnel section, or the collapsed sections. So this is a couple tunnel repair photos. Actually, I believe all 4 of these photos are from Cal Park. These are the steel sets that we would use. They're basically structural steel members rolled into a horseshoe shape. They are installed in the tunnel, blocked off against the rock with timber blocking. And then we'd go back and apply shotcrete, which is a pneumatically applied concrete material. So that really forms the structural member for our tunnel support. And that's what's shown here. This right here is the steel sets, and then you can't really see it, but we would apply shotcrete all the way around. One of the important things that we were able to do for Alto was to recognize that the Alto tunnel is bigger than we need it to be. If we're only shooting for the same size as Cal Park, we can actually fit the new steel sets inside of the existing timber sets. And that's important because the alternative, the typical way of doing this, if you need to maintain your similar tunnel size, is to rip out each timber set, hope nothing falls in on you, stabilize it, and then install your steel sets. So this is a cost and time saving, at least for the portion of the tunnel that's intact. We're not able to do this with half the tunnel that's not intact. Once the steel set is installed, we'd actually have a what's called stay form. It's a steel material on the back flange of the steel set, and then we would pump low strength concrete into the space in between the existing tunnel and that new structural member that we've just placed. For the half of the tunnel that is not intact, we're not able to, we would not be able to perform that same support scenario. So in that case, what is done is sometimes we do what's called breastboarding. Where you actually stabilize the face ahead of you and kind of take a little piece at a time. There's also something called spiling, where you shove a structural member out in advance of your tunnel face. It basically forms an umbrella around you that so you don't have material running in on you as you advance your face. And this is the typical design that we came up with here. This is the spiling. In this case, we would be mining the material out. We would not mine the entire collapsed zone. We would only mine what's big enough for our steel sets. Okay. And that's it for the tunnel reconstruction. We also looked at updating our original costs for filling up the tunnel and for a complete abandonment. So the concept is pretty simple for filling up the tunnel. You fill it up with a stable material. The execution of that is a little bit more difficult. What we would propose to do if that were selected would be to use the existing probe holes that we've already drilled as a means to fill up the tunnel. The intact sections could be filled with what we called controlled low-strength material. It's basically like a low-strength concrete, and that would be adequate for filling up the open sections here. The sections where we have existing collapses, that low-strength material just is a little bit too viscous to kind of permeate into there. So there we would have to use a lower viscosity grout, basically just cement and water to kind of fill in that area. We would then drill secondary holes. These would be for verification to make sure that all of the voids are actually filled. If they're not filled, we would do more grouting, either with controlled low-strength material or with the cement grout. And then if needed, there could be a third round of tertiary holes and further grouting. We'd continue doing that until you drill holes and find that there's no voids left. And that covers the filling of the tunnel. Now we're going to get into the cost estimates. So this brings us back to our interpretation of what the tunnel looked like. So for the tunnel rehab, I've already explained what kind of our base cost, our cost estimate is based on in this interpretation here. We've had comments since then, well, can you provide a range? What's the worst case scenario and what's the best case scenario? So we've looked at that recently, and we decided, well, what's the best case scenario? And that is if everything except for those isolated locations that we saw as collapse zones were intact. So for the best case, we've just taken these 3 areas and we've assumed very limited collapses around each one. Everything else is open, with the exception of what we know to be, either collapsed or filled. And that forms the basis for our best case scenario. Worst case scenario would be the opposite extreme, would be to assume that everything, with the exception that we could actually see is open, is collapsed. So that, in that case, everything is collapsed except for about 150 feet or so here, and about 20 feet or so here. Everything else is completely collapsed, and this is open as well. Best case and worst case form bookends. I don't believe that it's either one, but they're the extreme cases that bookend our best interpretation. And this is it. Back in 2010, so the total cost in 2010 was around 40 to 60 million, and that was just for the tunnel costs. We've actually escalated those up to 2017 values just for comparison purposes. And you'll find that the base construction cost escalated from our 2010 study was between 20 and 25 million. Our new base cost is actually a little bit higher. It's been between 22 and 26 million. But back in 2010, our contingency was around 62%. The reason that contingency was so high back then was because it was not a site-specific study. We had no engineering analysis back in 2010. That estimate was based purely on the contractor's bids that we received for the Cal Park tunnel. So we simply applied Cal Park numbers to Alto tunnel. There's a lot of risk involved with that, so that's consistent with the high contingency that we see there. So our cost now is a little bit higher. Our contingency is significantly lower. And what that means is our cost range is now a bit lower than the escalated 2010 estimate. And that our interpretation of the tunnel forms a cost estimate of $46.8 million. Moving on now to the complete backfill. This one, the 2010 estimate, escalated to 2017 dollars, is about 13.2 million, and that compares to about $8.5 million for our current cost estimate. And with that, I will turn it back over to Carrie.
Okay. Thank you, Sean, for going through all this technical information. I'm sure it's a lot to digest. That's why we've had the study out there for so long for you guys to take a look at. And we'll have an extended period of time for you to also submit additional comments and questions as well. So tonight, as Victoria explained, we're going to do questions and comments on the comment cards. If you need more, please raise your hand and we'll come around and give you some more. You can also submit your comments and questions by email or by postal mail. You can find my contact information on the website. And we're accepting those comments and questions through October 11th. So I look forward to receiving all your questions and comments. We expect to finalize this report in either October or November of this year. So it will be posted up to the website and you'll all get an email letting you know when it's up there. So after that is finished, that will complete the county's effort in studying those additional questions that we had about the Alto Tunnel. After that, that's a great time for your neighbors, for you to talk to your neighbors and your community leaders and your policymakers about, what options are you interested in seeing with the Alto Tunnel? There's a lot of information out there now. Those questions that we had after the Mill Valley to Corte Madera study that were identified, we believe are now, that information is now out there for you to help make that informed conversation. And as far as making a decision, as Craig mentioned, we do have Mill Valley, Corte Madera, and the county could make decisions to initiate a project. They could make a decision to fill and permanently stabilize the tunnel should that be identified as necessary. I've heard from some of the property owners adjacent to the tunnel that they've lived there for many years and haven't seen any movement, but that's not to say that it won't happen in the future. But that's anecdotal information that we've heard from neighbors. The decision could also be made that no further work is necessary at this time. And we could also make the decision to do some more further work on those other alternative routes along either Horse Hill or Camino Alto. Some work has already been done along those routes by the local agencies, and improvements have been made. So that's some great news that has come out from the study. And decisions could be made to do something else other than those options up there. So those aren't the only things that's out there for a decision to be made. So I encourage you to talk with your community members. I know this is an issue that can create some strong feelings, so I encourage you to be kind to your neighbors and your community members as well as your staff members. So please do, if you haven't already, send me an email or leave your email address, and we'll sign you up for updates. Since you're already here tonight, I expect that you're already on our mailing list. And here's my contact information. If you want to send me an email, send me a letter by postal mail or give me a call. So I think we're going to go ahead and move on with the questions session. If you have questions, go ahead and either hand them on in to me or Victoria. If you need more, pick up some more. We'll bring you some more. So thank you. We'll start up in about 10 minutes. If you want to grab some refreshments, we'll call you back. Thank you very much.
Okay, we got a lot of questions, and I just want to just give you a little overview of what we're going to do. We've divided them up into technical questions about the technical presentation. A lot of them were answered in the presentation. They were asked before the presentation. So we'll go through those, but we're going to go through them quickly because you've already heard the answers to them. And then there's sort of process, political, those questions, and we're going to answer those next. And then there's a whole bunch of questions about the pathway, but remember, that's not what we're here for. So those questions, we're going to include them in the Q&A that we post online, but we're not going to take time tonight to talk about them. Okay, with that.
Okay. Got a lot of technical questions. Some say the study did not model for seismic safety. Can you confirm whether the cost estimate reflects a seismically sound design? So we're a Bay Area-based firm. We specialize in tunnel design. For this conceptual study, no, we did not specifically look at seismic design, but this is a design that we would typically use in the Bay Area. So yes, I think it's seismically sound, and this is a conceptual study. If we did detailed design, we would look at seismic, but I have a good feeling that this design we have would not change significantly once we look at seismic. A Marin voice piece earlier this week claimed the study's estimate is an educated guess at best because it is based on conceptual designs. What advantage does basing estimates off of Cal Park Hills Tunnel recent rehabilitation and designs provide? Well, I'm not exactly sure what they're asking. I went through our thought process on how we interpreted the data and how we arrived at our interpretation of the tunnel condition. We performed an independent, we developed an independent design. We performed an independent cost estimate this round. That is in comparison to 2010 when we simply used the Cal Park numbers. So I think the current estimate is more accurately reflects what we can expect to see. But I mean, the Cal Park Tunnel does provide a good benchmark for us, and it definitely, we look at those numbers. This tunnel costs $21,000 a foot. A typical 10-foot wide path is $74 a foot. I can confirm the first number. I can't confirm the second number. Does this mean you could build 120 miles of bike path? I don't know. I can't confirm that second number. I think it's more of a rhetorical question. Sure. Okay. Yes. Okay. Why is the cost shown on page 21 $44.6 million instead of $46.8 million? This refers to the report. That was an error that has since been fixed in the report. So thanks for catching that. Given the fact most of the tunnel is inferred to be not intact, do the estimates warrant such a large drop in contingency? Okay, so we went from 62% contingency down to 20% contingency. The contingency is, I mean, we now have a idea of what's actually inside the tunnel. We have the original contingency was because we had no idea what was inside the tunnel. It was also because we were basing all of our costs on Cal Park and not new engineering design. So the fact that we have new engineering design, the fact that we have a better idea of what's actually in the tunnel warrants our drop in contingency down to 20%. Sean spoke of the best and worst case scenarios, but only gave one cost estimate for rehab and one for filling the tunnel. Please clarify what conditions these estimates reflect. What are the numbers for the best and worst case? I think I covered that in the design, so maybe this was before the presentation. Um, Three-fifths, oh, I can't read this writing. Three-fifths, this is your study drilling being, um, three-fifths. Since the tunnel was open until the 1970s, all collapses must have taken place since this time, correct? All collapses that we see now have occurred since the 70s. I don't know. I think there were some minor problems with the tunnel before the 70s, and those obviously were fixed. Uh, is there the possibility of voids existing above the original location of the tunnel rather than the south end where collapse is? Yes, there's possibilities of remaining voids. There's possibility of remaining voids in the collapsed zones. When collapses fall down, they leave a void and they'll stope up. So there are the possibility of additional voids. Oh, okay, thank you. With three-fifths of your study drilling being inconclusive, how are you so confident with your estimate, especially with collapsed areas, which are unknown? And this is exactly why we took this into consideration. That's why we provided that bookend range of best case, worst case scenarios. Yeah. So you don't know if the area between 4 and 5 is open all the way, correct? No, we do not know that conclusively, but based on the information that we had, prior construction records, what we know about that area, that was our interpretation. Why can't you go back into hole 5 and push it forward into the tunnel to get more of that area? I wish we could. It's not a matter of pushing it forward, it's a matter of the boring coming down right on the tunnel sidewall, and we would have to completely re-drill that boring. Can you comment on how often this type of tunnel has been executed, with what success? Well, Cal Park is an excellent example. It's similar. Cal Park had collapsed zones, although not quite as much as what we see at Alto, and that was completed with great success. Cal Park was completed with success. We complete tunnels all over the Bay Area, driving new tunnels. We also do rehab tunnels all the time. So I think this could be done very successfully. Okay. Please explain construction process. 1, how long will it really last? So I assume you mean the tunnel reconstruction. I want to say from our cost estimate, we are looking at a construction period of 24 months. And that actually was assuming hitting it from both portals at the same time. Okay, thanks. How big a laydown area would they clear out? Would they clear out 2 acres of trees, woods right up to the property lines? I don't know. This is a conceptual study. We didn't look into laydown areas. I mean, I can tell you that we do tunnels in Manhattan on postage stamp size lots. It can be small. It just means double handling material and increased costs. So, I mean, more area is great, but we can deal with small areas. Will it involve ear-piercing noise 8 hours a day for 2 to 3 years? That's always an issue. We do our best to. We do our best. It's typically a kind of a low hum, like generators and fans. And there's sound attenuating devices. We did Caldecott Tunnel, where they built a large sound wall to shield the nearby condos right by the tunnel. So there's methods that can be done. I have asthma. Will it cause significant dust particles to spread? Uh, there's ways to keep dust down. I mean, usually we spray water down, and specifications are written such that you have to keep errant dust to a controllable or to an allowable level. How does this cost to repair and reopen the tunnel compare to costs to open new Devil's Slide Tunnel? I don't know. I don't have the actual cost for Devil's Slide. Swiss tunnel building everywhere and on other projects. I think you're referring to a method of tunneling called New Austrian tunneling method. It's a method of sequentially mining, not really appropriate for rehabilitating an existing collapsed tunnel. How does this cost compare to the per mile costs to widen freeways in California and carry additional traffic? I don't have those numbers. Is it possible to make the tunnel wider than Cal Park, perhaps 14 feet? Or would this require to remove old wood supports? So yeah, we grappled with this during design. Cal Park, 11 feet 4 inches. We can get away with the design that I showed if we maintain that width. If we go any wider than that, we'd have to start ripping out timbers, and then the cost would grow. So. Are any portions of the tunnel currently in a state of collapse or at risk of collapsing? Yes, we've found collapsed, and I think there's always a risk of more collapsing, although we have not done further investigations that would be required. Are there houses, roads, or utilities located above the tunnel? If so, does collapse pose a threat to adjacent properties or roads? Yes, there's houses, particularly at the north portal. There's at the north end of the tunnel, there's houses directly above the tunnel. At the south end, there's houses adjacent to the tunnel. We've already seen collapses at the south end. There's always risk, although we've heard anecdotal evidence from neighbors that they haven't seen any sign of damage. To restore the tunnel, would you work from the middle and then out, or from outside to the middle? From the outside in. One side at a time. We haven't done a detailed study. Our cost estimate assumed from both portals in concurrently. The actuals would depend on, our final design, if that were the case, if it came to that. Is there danger of tunnel collapse from doing nothing? Do you have to eventually fill? We've already seen collapses. I can't say there's no danger. Like I said, the neighbors have said there's no signs of distress. So, yeah. Sorry.
So we'll stay as long as there's questions, and there's still stacks of yellow question sheets. So if you have more questions, get another sheet and you can just keep giving them to us and we'll keep answering questions.
The UP Railroad has the right-of-way for the majority of the north and south ends of the tunnel. UP Railroad holds the right-of-way for the majority of the north and south portions of the tunnel. Same question, any concern of portion caving in? Please confirm the construction and development costs, excluding any contingencies, and escalation factor is 41.35 million, higher than the range of, I might have to get back to this question. It's asking for detailed numbers, and I'm not exactly sure what it's asking, but maybe while Carrie's giving answers, I can look more into this one. How can you assume bore 5 is intact if only 20 feet can be seen? 150 feet plus 20 feet is only 170 feet of 2,100 total feet. 2/3 is collapsed. So I think I went through kind of our rationale for why it is we assumed what the tunnel is. So I think we answered that. Why were the 2010 cost estimates higher? What construction costs in the Cal Park would not affect or apply for Alto? So I think I explained the actual base cost that we came up with to rehabilitate the tunnel is actually higher. It's the contingency that's now lower. We had a very healthy contingency on that Cal Park estimate. How did you know about the collapsed sections in the tunnel? Besides taking a scan, were there collapses monitored in the past, and how? And who monitored these collapses? So there's been reports before the tunnel, before the south end of the tunnel collapsed and was sealed up. There's been reports of people going in and seeing some more minor collapses. That's all we had reported prior to this study. So that, in conjunction with our scan, or our boreholes hitting collapse zones, is what we use to interpret that as collapsed. Tunnel opponents have claimed that construction will release, and then it's a quote down here, cement, concrete, creosote-soaked railroad ties, and other substances known to be harmful to human health, including lung, stomach, and colon cancer, skin infections, kidney disease, vision impairment, asthma, COPD from breathing, toxic substances, having particulates lodged in their having particulates lodged in their lungs. Agree or disagree? Well, the question says, tunnel opponents have claimed that construction will release the following. I don't know if they have claimed that, so I can't agree or disagree. As to whether or not those things would happen, this is a conceptual study. We'd have to do more studies. But like I said before, our specifications are written such that these risks are usually kept at bay. That's all I can say. And that's all I have.
Okay, on to the next stack. Are you guys ready for this? Okay. Why did you not investigate the part of the tunnel under the Corte Madera homes? As I mentioned before, we took a look at the center of the tunnel between the concrete plug and the collapsed section and filled section on the southern end. We did not look under the southernmost section, or the northernmost section, which is right up in here, because we have fairly recent documents that this was stabilized with concrete, so we were relying on that information in those reports. The other reason that we didn't go in there is that our access points into the tunnel from public right-of-ways, it's very, very limited. So we were able to access it from the public right-of-way at the top of Camino Alto at the Chapman site, and then at Underhill site and bore down into the tunnel. We were not really able to identify an appropriate location down on this side that would give us a lot more different information than we already knew about this section of the tunnel. Next question was, what is the total estimated cost of the tunnel, including all access routes? And I think I went over that in the introduction. The 2010 study identified, if you like, I can go back to that, but I believe off the top of my head it was 48 to 60, including the entire route. Those were, you can take a look at those in the 2010 study, and all of those detailed cost estimates are identified in there, as well as the descriptions of improvements along that entire route. So if you have any more questions about those, I'd be more than happy to take you through those afterwards. This question is, given the county has not accurately projected costs on major projects, how do we believe this estimate, especially since not everything needed is included in your estimate? Well, I think looking here, we hit it pretty close as far as the construction costs were concerned. And based on the fact that we had Cal Park's actual construction costs, and we were able to take that information and those lessons learned and bring it forward into this cost estimate, and then further refine those estimates with this information that we learned from this investigation, I think we have a pretty good estimate here. Hasn't changed all that much since 2010, other than reducing this contingency here, as Sean explained earlier. This question is, any possibility for the railroad to pay for any of the cost? Well, we don't know that yet. The county holds the center section of the tunnel, then Union Pacific holds these outer ends of the tunnel, and then there's a private property owner who holds whatever rights the railroad held, and that private property owner holds those rights. So we don't know if the Union Pacific Railroad would want to share or not in the cost of either reconstructing or filling or doing anything in the tunnel. This question is, will the county consider a GO bond, a general obligation bond, to finance the tunnel based on the study? What bond authorization would be requested? There's been no discussion of a bond. We're not sure about that. Please identify what government funds would go to other communities if we don't use them. At this point, this funding source that we've used to do this study is completed at the end of this study. We would not be losing any funds to complete this study. If you're asking about bicycle and pedestrian funds and being competitive for applying for grant funds for a possible future project, that I couldn't tell you how many different possible funding sources there are. There are many different bicycle and pedestrian and livable communities and those sorts of things, but those are all types of grant funds that your local agencies go after to make improvements in your communities. How would this be funded if there is a decision to initiate the project? What would the cost be to Mill Valley Corte Madera, or the county for the project, and for ongoing maintenance. This person says, I do not want our schools, roads, or public safety to suffer. As I explained just a little bit earlier, there are lots of different kinds of grant funds that we've been successful in applying for. So if a decision was made to initiate a project, that local agency would start applying for those kinds of funds. What the cost would be to Mill Valley, Corte Madera, and the county, that's undetermined at this point. That would be up to each of those local agencies, the policymakers, to determine what an acceptable level of funding is to them. And as far as ongoing maintenance, I believe in the 2010 study, it was assumed about $300,000 a year would be needed for ongoing maintenance and operations for the Alto Tunnel. And that's based on the Cow Park Tunnel, what its maintenance is each year. And generally speaking, the pots of funds that would go towards funding this type of project are not the same that are for schools or for roads sometimes, but usually those are for projects that go to improve roads, not for maintenance. Grant funds don't often pay for maintaining facilities. And public safety isn't usually affected. They don't come out of the same pot of money. What democratic steps can the public take to expedite the process of getting the Alto Tunnel built? I witness bikes almost getting killed every weekend along Camino Alto Hill. I live there. Please, let's hurry up. Well, as I explained earlier, have these conversations with your neighbors and your leaders and your policymakers to have that conversation and figure out if this is an important priority for your community to invest in, that time and that financial investment. Once a decision is made, how long will this take? I'm assuming it's about if a decision is made to move forward with a project. Public projects of this size take a long time. I've already been at this 9 years, almost 10 years now, working on this project. And once a decision is made, there's still a long process to go through. There's the grant seeking process that takes many years to cobble together lots of grant funds. There's the environmental review process that takes 18 to 24 to 36 months to complete, and that involves a ton of public involvement. And then there's the finalizing the design and engineering process that also includes some public involvement. And then there's the construction that Sean talked about earlier. So this isn't a short time frame. It's a long time frame, and you can kind of add all that up together. I'm sorry, there's also another question here. And will it require a public vote in November or June? That I'm not certain. I haven't heard of a public vote being taken in June or November. What will the next steps be? There you go. Comment cards, finalizing the tunnel investigation, posting it to the website in October and November, and then you guys continuing your community conversations about your priorities with this project. Where do you anticipate the construction staging site for the equipment and work to be on the Mill Valley or Corte Madera side? I believe Sean answered that earlier. We haven't identified the lay down sites or that yet. Who is the homeowner with the rights at the south end, and what legal rights do they have? During the real estate research portion that we did, we were able to collect all of the title reports for each of the parcels above the tunnel, and did verify that each of the parcels had the easement running underneath. However, there was the one parcel at the south end that was in that easement maintained in the private owner's name. It did not get transferred, or it did not stay with the Union Pacific. It was transferred over to a private property owner. So that private property owner does maintain all of the legal rights that any other private property owners have. This is the same question about the private property. Asking, does the Mill Valley resident claiming title to the entrance have proof of sale for that property? If so, what is his or her proof? We have verified that through the title research. So yes, they do have proof. Since Union Pacific owns the two ends of the tunnel, does the town of Corte Madera buy or lease those two ends? How much does this cost? The town of Corte Madera does not lease the two ends inside the tunnel. If you're talking about the pathway, let's see if I can get back to this. The pathway on either end is in the county's hands, right here. This is in public ownership here. Right here is the north portal. Right here, this blue section is the Union Pacific. The county holds the center portion of the tunnel. Union Pacific holds this. This is a private owner. And then this goes down to Vasco Court right here. And that is held by the county. What is the purpose of sealing the tunnel if it's perfectly sound as is? Isn't railroad responsible for both ends? One of the things that we were asked to do was take a look at the cost estimate should it require that the tunnel be filled. It does not identify who is assigned the split of those costs, should there be any split of costs. It doesn't assign costs to Union Pacific or the county or to a private property owner or whomever. It just assigns an estimate of what it might cost. So those would be, if that decision is made at some future point as a necessary means to do that, it provides us with some information as to how much that might cost. Since the homes on, above, and around the tunnel have shown degrading over the last 40 years, who is liable should this disruption cause collapse, property issues, etc.? Well, that is an insurance question that I can't answer because I'm not an insurance expert or an attorney, but that would need to be something that's looked into further. Should a collapse happen at some point, that we'd need to look into all of the property owners would need to look into all of the special circumstances that may be different for each situation. If the tunnel is left as is and there is a collapse, if homes are damaged, who is responsible? Again, that's a situational thing that would need to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. If the tunnel is not opened and rehabbed, why does the tunnel have to have anything done to it? Just walk away. Noted. Are any houses adjacent to the tunnel in any danger from construction of the tunnel? should there be a point where there's a project to reconstruct the tunnel, there would be geotechnical monitoring that would need to be done of the homes around the tunnel. That's definitely something that we would want to take a look at, and we've heard concerns from some of the neighbors. So that's something that we would take a look at to monitor during construction, and that would be something that's normal for this kind of a project. This question is blasting a tunnel. Oh, pardon me. Tunnel opponents have argued online that reopening the Alto tunnel will require blasting a tunnel through and underneath 200 or more homes. Agree or disagree? Disagree. The tunnel would not require any blasting. That's not anticipated at all. That foundations of 2 homes will be required to be re-engineered and rebuilt. That's something that would need to be evaluated at some point down the line to see if that would be required. But at this point, that's not something that we've identified as needed, nor as something that's an issue. But we haven't identified it as not being an issue either. But that would need to be something that's evaluated in a future point. And at least 2 family homes will have to be purchased by eminent domain and the families relocated. Agree or disagree? That has not been identified. We know that there's one portion along the tunnel right-of-way or the tunnel alignment that is in private hands. It does not have a home on it. It is an open parcel, and we're not aware of any homes that would need to be purchased or taken by eminent domain. Will it be necessary to remove or vacate any houses during the construction? We're not sure at this point. We'll need to evaluate that at a future point during the environmental review process, if it gets to that point. People have claimed online and in public meetings that maintaining a pedestrian and bike tunnel costs 5 times more than maintaining a road. I think Sean also answered that question earlier. Question is, a Corte Madera neighbor claims that, quote, the Board of Supervisors sees the Alto Tunnel as a surefire recreational tourist attraction, end quote, and, quote, the Marin County staff working on this project intends the reconstructed tunnel to be used as a major tourist attraction, end quote. Agree or disagree? I can only speak for myself, but I disagree. I'm not a tourist attraction person. And I have heard no direction nor statements made by my bosses at the Board of Supervisors that identifies the Alto Tunnel as a surefire recreational tourist attraction. At what point will a detailed description be given of the scope, intensity, and duration of the construction, such as how much area at each portal will need to be excavated, numbers of trucks entering and leaving, etc. Those are things that will be done during more detailed design. We're not at this point right now. It's a question, why was the study done by those who would benefit from the projected work? I think you're talking about maybe the tunnel engineers. They're the experts in the field. They're the ones who know about tunnel construction. I don't know about tunnel construction. That's why we hire the experts. What were the projected numbers of bike foot traffic for Cal Park Tunnel as compared to actual bike foot traffic in Cow Park? That's a question I can get back to you on. I have your name and email address, so I'll have to get back to you on that. How do you weigh those neighbors directly affected versus bikers? As far as finalizing this study, there's no weight given. We're taking facts and information on finalizing this this study because it's providing information so that you can go out and have conversations and help make decisions here. This question relates to presentation's use of the word community. What community? That's a good question. There's lots of community. There's the neighbors, the homeowners that live directly above and adjacent to. There's the larger community here in Marin County. There's the bike commuters, the walkers, the 8 to 88 folks that are trying to get on bikes. It is really everyone here. That's what I mean by community. You get out and talk to everyone. And this fourth question was answered by Sean already. Any seismic considerations for projection costs and plan? Let's see. Seismic construction. And then this one has several detailed questions that I think we can follow up with Sean later on. Do you want to take a look at these? Drainage issues. I think you've already answered the ones in the front.
So we've answered seismic information. How long would construction take? We answered that. What are the elevation differences from north to south? I don't recall. It's not a great difference. Couple feet. How would you ventilate the tunnel? So Cal Park has ventilation. A tunnel of this length really doesn't need forced air ventilation during normal operations, but ventilation is often put in these tunnels for emergency situations, fire, mostly fire. What drainage issues do you anticipate? There's a drainage. Cal Park has a drainage system in the tunnel. That drainage is collected and conveyed out the tunnel, and it would flow into probably a storm drain. And I think the rest were for you.
Okay, and what would be the hours it would be open? That's yet to be determined, but as we're looking at Cal Park, I believe the hours are, is it 11 to 6, 11 to 5? Are toilet facilities being considered? At this point, that's a detail that would need to come later on. And how and who would provide policing services? It would likely be your local policing services, and if not, it could be the sheriff's department, but that is, again, another detail that we need to be worked out. So I believe that concludes all of our questions. If nobody has any further questions for me tonight, you're welcome to, again, send me an email, send me a call, shoot me a call, and, oh, you have another one?
Well, I still don't understand this question, so Bob, if you want to ask me, come see me later.
He's right behind you. So thank you very much for coming out tonight.